The email arrived just after sunrise on a dry June morning in Denver. I opened it and felt the room tilt a degree. She asked me to wire $250,000 for her wedding and a honeymoon in Bora Bora. At the bottom, a polite note about transfer timing, and then the line that bent the breath out of me. Eric thinks your presence might distract from the guest's experience. Please do not make this awkward. I set the phone flat. I picked up the phone and read the line again. I stood, carried the phone down the hallway, and stopped at the shelf where our wedding photo lives. Anne in a cotton dress, hair pinned back, a spray of wildflowers from a roadside stand. Me in a borrowed suit with a stubborn crease. I printed the email and set the warm paper beside the frame. I rinsed my mug, wiped the ring it left on the table, and sat again. I read the spreadsheet line by line. Creative direction package. Drone cinematography. Arrival lounge scenting. The total at the bottom was not a mistake. $50,000 for a venue that would barely remember them a week later. $12,000 for flowers that die. I wanted to call Lily. I pictured her in a concrete loft with tall windows, laptop open. In my mind, she answered on the second ring and laughed and said, "Dad, it is not as bad as it sounds." In my mind, I asked about that last sentence, and she said she did not write it. That Eric had strong opinions he liked to pass off as truths. In my mind, we sorted it, but I did not call. Not yet. Instead, I printed the spreadsheet too and squared the 2 pages on the table until their corners lined up. Then I walked to the back door and stepped into the yard. The air smelled like dust and cut grass. In the corner of the garden, the lavender I planted the spring after Anne died had come back, stubborn and purple. I crouched and pinched a stem between my fingers until the oils rose. Back inside, I opened the cupboard and took down the black notebook where I keep notes. I wrote the date and 3 lines. $250,000 requested for wedding and travel. Presents discouraged. Do not make this awkward. When did my girl become a person who thinks I am an embarrassment? I carried the notebook to the living room and sat in Anne's old chair. The answer did not arrive. Lily at 8, banging a spoon against a mixing bowl, asking if bridges get lonely. Lily at 15, staying late to finish a school project and falling asleep at the dining room table. Pencil marks smudged across her cheek. Lily at 22 in a cap and gown on a windy day in Seattle, hugging me hard, saying she would pay me back for everything. The phone buzzed again. A second email. This one from a wedding planner named Vanessa Moore. She wrote that she was thrilled to collaborate on a once-in-a-lifetime experience. She attached a timeline and a list of deliverables. She wrote that as the primary family partner, I should expect outreach from the media team. I replied with 5 words and no greeting. Received. I will review and respond. Then I closed the laptop. On the counter by the fruit bowl rests the envelope from the printer. I slid the pages inside and addressed it to myself at my own street. Then I set the envelope under the photo frame so the weight of glass held it. I walked to the garage and lifted the old toolbox onto the workbench. A chalk line, a plumb bob, a steel square with edges that do not lie. I rolled the chalk line across my palm and remembered teaching Lily to snap one in the driveway. She was 5. We made blue ghosts on the concrete and she laughed so hard she hiccuped. When I put the tools back, I did it slowly, one by one. "All right," I said to the empty air. I stood at the sink and washed my hands. I dried them on the striped towel and folded it straight. Then I took the phone and scrolled my contacts to Lily. My thumb hovered. I could see the conversation before it happened. I could hear the shape of her voice, brisk and practiced. The part of me that still wanted to be invited to her life said, "Call." The part of me said, "Not yet." I opened a new note and listed what I knew. The ask was specific and large. The rationale was presentation, experience, brand. The condition was my absence. I wrote the words guests, experience, and drew a small box around them. What kind of guest needs protecting from a father who paid for braces and field trips and the house where she learned to read? What kind of experience breaks if a man with 40-year-old scuffed dress shoes stands in the back and claps? The refrigerator hummed again. I turned on the radio and let a jazz station fill the room. During the second song, I called my financial advisor, Paul, and left a message to ring me back. I did not mention weddings. I said I needed to review a dormant account we had set up years ago for education. By the time the track ended, I had a short plan. Print, file, verify, then communicate, but on my terms and in writing. The older I get, the more I trust small steps done properly. I took the envelope again and slid a sticky note inside with the phrase from the bottom of the email. Please do not make this awkward. I let the paper rest in my hands. I would not be awkward. I would be accurate. I walked to the front window and watched a pair of kids ride scooters past the sycamore. One wore a helmet too big, and the strap flapped. The other yelled something that sounded like joy. I remember Lily racing down this same sidewalk on a red bike with training wheels, shouting, "Dad, look what I can do." I remembered running beside her the day we took the training wheels off and how she did not know I had let go because for 10 perfect seconds she believed she could fly, and therefore she did. I went back to the table and set my palm on the printer paper. The line about my presence kept pulsing. Distract from the guest's experience. I thought of the guests who mattered. Anne and me. The bus driver who honked and waved when we crossed the street. They did not need anything but our names and the way we said yes. The phone buzzed again. This time a calendar invite from Vanessa. Kickoff call for the Grayson Hamilton wedding experience, she called it. There was a list of attendees and a note that a media liaison would join to discuss publication opportunities. I declined and typed a line in the reason field. Unavailable, will respond in writing. Then I closed the laptop and pulled the blinds halfway to dampen the high noon glare. I carried the photo of Anne to the table and set it atop the envelope like a paperweight made of an afternoon in 1983. You would have liked the lavender, I said. I sat with that a while. Not angry, not yet, just letting the room return to its regular size after the email had stretched it into a place where air felt thinner. When the jazz host announced the next hour, I stood, put the photo back, and reached for the phone with the steadiness that comes from knowing what matters. I did not call Lily. I would, but not now. First, I needed to make sure my name had not wandered into places it did not belong. First, I needed to be the man she grew up trusting, the one who fixes what creaks before the roof, learns how to leak. I slid the envelope into the drawer beside the table and closed it gently until the latch caught. Then I turned off the radio and listened as the house held its breath with me. I rinsed the glass and drank tap water until the taste of coffee and shock thinned out. I crossed the hall to the linen closet. Inside the cedar box were the things that managed to stand still when years run. A dried boutonniere with a stem as brittle as glass. The notebook lay at the bottom, black cover dulled by fingerprints. I carried it to the kitchen and set it on the table. I opened to the middle and found a list of books Anne assigned one fall. Morrison and Steinbeck, and a sticky note that said, "Find a poem that tells the truth about work." I kept turning pages until I found in her precise handwriting. Marriage is not a stage. It is the place where two people do not give up at the same time. I could see the day she said it. Anne had a dozen kids from her senior class spread across the grass. Lily was 9, and determined to stay if she promised to be quiet. Anne read a paragraph about a couple mending a roof before the storm, then closed the book and talked to them like grown people who could handle the truth. There are parts of love that nobody will photograph, she told them. The unglamorous Tuesday parts where you do chores anyway and speak softly even when you are tired. Lily scribbled in a notebook, like she wanted to keep up. I flipped forward until I reached the last third of the notebook. I found the line I had come for without knowing I had come for it. If the day ever arrives when Lily forgets what love means, show her our small wedding. Underneath, a second sentence. Not the pictures, Tom. The part after, where the days stack and the promise. Giaz. I leaned back and let the words stand in the kitchen air. Then I closed the book and opened it again because it felt like a door I was not ready to shut. Memory carried me to Pueblo, where we stood at a counter and said yes in voices steady enough to quiet our nerves. Anne, in a white cotton dress she found on sale, hair pinned with 2 bobby pins she stole from her sister. Me in a suit, borrowed from my brother. The clerk stamped the paper. We walked out into bright sun. At lunch, the waitress saw our smiles and slid extra strawberries onto our pie. We did not own a camera worth writing about, so there are only a few foggy snapshots of that day, and none of them capture what Anne meant by the part after. That was pantry shelves we built together, and the first winter we learned which cracks in the windows demanded plastic and which would forgive us. That was Lily arriving in a rush of blue blankets and sleeplessness, and wonder that arrived like a freight train. That was late payments and a transmission that died at the worst moment, and laughter on a night when we could not afford a movie. So we made popcorn and played gin rummy, and pretended we were the kind of people who did not worry. I traced the edge of the page and felt the steady weight of years. The email this morning had put a price on something that never had one. You cannot invoice a life. You can list the costs and still miss the value. Anne knew that without ever saying it like an instruction. She showed it the way a good teacher does, by letting you stumble into it and then naming what you found so you could carry it forward. The front door settled against its frame with a sound I have heard 1,000 times. I stood and set water to boil out of habit more than need. I moved to the back porch while the kettle warmed. My phone stayed where I had left it on the table. I did not want screens between me and her voice on paper. I brought the notebook outside and read the line about showing Lily our wedding again. The first image that came was the courthouse, but the second was the small stuff that followed. The way Anne ironed the collar of my shirts on Sunday evenings and lectured me kindly about the virtue of starch. The way I learned to keep a book face down on the arm of the couch for the moment she wanted to read a line out loud and ask if I heard it the way she did. The way Lily learned that a good apology lands faster than your pride can run. I poured water over a bag and watched the swirl climb, then set the mug on the table, while steam did the part the world asks of it, and then leaves you to the rest. Between the mug and the notebook lay the printed email with its tidy request. Anne would have smiled at the picture that made. I turned a few more pages, not looking for anything and finding something anyway. A list of things she wanted to tell Lily on her 30th birthday and never wrote down anywhere else. Work is a good place to be useful. Beauty is a good place to rest. Money is a tool, not a mirror. Say thank you out loud to the people who pick up the slack when you are carrying less than your share. I read it twice, heard Anne's even voice, and then let the page close itself. The clock on the wall ticked in a way I had stopped noticing since she died. I stood and walked the notebook back to the cedar box. I tucked it under the boutonniere and the playbill and the Polaroid of a gap-toothed grin. In the hallway, I paused where the carpet shows the faint path of years of footsteps from bedroom to kitchen to door. When Lily was small, she used to run that path before school and shout up the stairwell to ask if her shoes matched her socks. Anne would answer that, "A person who is kind will always match." The house let that echo go, and then the quiet came back. I carried the box to the closet and set it where it belongs, behind the quilt, cedar facing out like a small promise. On the way to the kitchen, I stopped by the window and watched a thin cloud pull apart above the sycamore. I do not know when forgetting begins or ends. I do know how remembering works. You pick up the right tool, and you use it as it was made to be used. You stand where you can see straight. You check your measurements twice. You build what will carry weight. Back at the table, I lifted my mug and tasted the tea. It had gone warm. I drank it anyway. The refrigerator hummed and fell still. The clock ticked once, then again, each sound clean in the empty room. I rested my hand on the printed email, then on the closed notebook that was no longer there, and I said the line the page had put in my mouth. Maybe it is time to remind her by how I live. The house made that quiet acknowledging sound old houses make when you are not fighting them. I sat a little longer and let the minute pass, the clock marking it with a small, insistent knock that felt like a hand on a door I would open soon. The next right thing was to remember how we got here. Lily met Eric Hamilton in the summer of 2022 at a design conference in San Diego. She said she had just watched a presentation where a company called LumaLive turned a wedding into an interactive story. A drone choreographed itself to the vows. The band mixed with recorded sound and produced a song that existed only for that night. It felt new, she said, like the future without fingerprints. For months after that call, I heard his name in pieces. Eric thought this. Eric knew that venue. Eric had formed a partnership with a hotel group in the desert. In December, she sent me a short video he had posted of a couple walking through a field while tiny lights rose from the grass and formed their initials in the air. It was clever and a little lonely, and I did not know how to say both at once. So I wrote back that the night looked beautiful. They spent the next year circling each other's lives. He came to Los Angeles from San Francisco twice a month for meetings and found ways to fold dinner with Lily into his calendar. She flew north when he had a launch and sent me a photo of her in a black dress with a badge around her neck that said creative guest. I met him for the first time that spring, when Lily asked if I would come out to see her studio and have dinner with them. I told her I would be glad to. I did not tell her I had already booked the ticket before she finished asking. Eric arrived 5 minutes late with an apology that sounded practiced and a smile that acted like we were already friends. He called me Tom. During the first round of small plates, he asked about my work in a way that let me answer for 30 seconds, before he turned the conversation back to the future. He said the old model of ceremonies was boring, that our generation loved narrative, but his generation loved narrative you could control. He used the word community often, and the word brand more often. Lily looked happy in a way that made me want to be wrong about any doubt I felt. She touched his wrist when she disagreed, and he let her finish before he explained his point again with different adjectives. At some point, he asked me what I thought of the video she had sent back in December. I told him it was technically impressive. I told him it made me wonder how love handles choreography. He laughed, not unkindly, and said love does great when you give it lighting and a soundtrack. He leaned back and angled his chin toward the skyline. He said that people want a version of their life that is better than the facts. He said his generation did not need to preserve. They could build an image more beautiful than reality, and that was the point. I said that images collapse the way foam does, and asked who stands up when the foam goes flat. Lily gave a small laugh that did not belong to her, and looked away toward a corner where no one sat. We ate and let the topic drift to easier ground. I nodded, where politeness requires a nod. Lily told me about a townhouse she had just finished in Echo Park, how the client cried when she saw that the kitchen lights looked like stars when you turned them down. Now that is a room worth photographing, I said. And Lily lit up because I had given her craft the kind of attention that makes work feel like work is enough. At the curb, he took Lily's hand and told me it was an honor to finally meet the man who built the bridges his daughter walks. That would have been charming if it had not sounded like a line he had tried in a mirror. He called a car for us and said he would grab a scooter and meet Lily at home. In the back seat, she leaned her head against the window and watched the city scroll. I asked if she was happy. She said she was, and then asked if I was proud of her. Every cell I own answered yes. She said Eric wants the ceremony to be something the industry will talk about for a decade. She said it like a dream that both excited and worried her. I said, a good beginning does not need applause to be a good beginning. She turned and looked at me hard, the way she did at 14 when she wanted to drive my truck and thought logic might move a mountain. She said the world is different now. I said gravity is not. She arrived late and out of breath and hugged me the way she always has, tight and present, and for a moment the future did not crowd us. She showed me renderings of the venue they were considering in Malibu and a mock-up of what Eric called guest journeys, stations where people could interact and shape the soundtrack and send messages into a projected sky. She used words like kinetic and responsive, and I listened for the word promise. It did not come. On my flight back to Denver, I wrote notes on a napkin with a dull pencil left over from a crossword. Met Eric. Bright, fast, performs ease. Treats story like architecture that needs overbuilding. Lily, bright too, laughed when cornered. Looked away when truth stood up. I tucked the napkin in my shirt pocket and slept badly against a window that vibrated. Months moved. They took a trip to Napa for a showcase. They posted a photo from Big Sur, where the cliffs looked like a lie that decided to be true. At Thanksgiving, they came to Denver, and Eric insisted on brining the turkey with a complicated recipe he read on a site that claimed science never lies. He did well. We ate on plates we bought in 1983 when we could barely afford a set and pretended they were china. After dinner, Eric walked through the house and told me what he would change. He would open this, widen that, put glass here to chase the light. He said Lily could design the remodel and that it would be a great story to tell. I said the house knows us and we know it, and sometimes change is learning to stay. In January, they announced to friends that they had chosen a date. Early fall, before the winds in the canyons get tricky, after the heat stops acting like a dare. The phrase they used in the email was the first interactive wedding in America. It came with a link to a short sizzle reel that looked like a movie trailer. I watched it twice and wondered if the part where two people say yes would fit quietly inside such a production. Maybe I am old. Maybe I think too much about things that last. Back home, I put their date on the calendar and underlined it. I told myself I would wait and see before deciding what any of it meant. Then, the email arrived last week with the spreadsheet and the line about my presence. Standing in my kitchen now, with the notebook back in its place and the tea gone warm in my blood, I could place the moment the distance started. It was small and polite and wore good shoes. It smiled and said Tom like a compliment. Lily laughed when she wanted to breathe. I set my hand on the table and pressed until I felt wood and not memory. Some bridges you only know are failing when the first hairline crack reflects the morning sun just right. I had that light now, thin and exact, on a quiet Denver afternoon that did not deserve the weight I was about to put on it. A week slid past. The phone rang with Paul Nguyen's name on the screen. He said he had been reviewing dormant accounts as we discussed. He said the 529 college plan I opened for Lily back when tuition felt like a mountain had been linked to an external merchant profile. He said the merchant reference pointed to a wedding vendor contract out of California, and the pending authorization showed a first draw of $180,000. I asked how an education plan touches a wedding contract. Paul said it should not. He said the plan administrator showed a third-party link request approved by an electronic signature that matched an image on file for T. Grayson. He said the request referenced a role called primary family partner. I asked Paul to read me the details. He said there were 2 pending debits scheduled inside a 10-day window, both flagged for manual review because of the amount. I asked what we could do this minute. Paul said we could remove all external links, place a hard transfer freeze, require in-person notarized approval for any change, and set alerts to ping both of us if anyone breathed near that account. He said he could conference the plan administrator while I stayed on. We confirmed identity, authorized the freeze, revoked external access, replaced security questions with ones only my family would know. We added a note that withdrawals would only be permitted to accredited institutions and only upon presentation of current enrollment verification. I said I was grateful it had not happened yet. Then I opened the laptop and searched every folder for anything I had missed. The planner's name surfaced more than once in the last month, each time with glossy language designed to make you nod without thinking. It was a signing receipt from a document service. The subject line named me and referenced a vendor onboarding form. I opened the receipt and looked at the tiny thumbnail of my signature. It was the old scan from state work before retirement, the loop in the G too careful, the cross on the T running longer than it does now. That meant someone had pulled the image from a place I once trusted. The audit trail listed the time to the second and an IP summary I could not use without help. It also listed a signer step labeled by role rather than person. Primary family partner. I called Paul back and asked if the vendor had a name that was not a placeholder. He said the payment profile pointed to a management company called Westline Event Works, registered in Santa Monica. He said the descriptor connected to Moore Planning, which translated in my head to Vanessa Moore. He said he would email me a full printout and suggested I talk to counsel. I told Alan Perez the short version, and then sent the longer one by mail while he stayed on the line. He wanted the document receipt, the audit trail, the planner messages, the freeze confirmation, the account logs Paul had pulled, and any email using the phrase primary family partner. He said he would draft letters that lawyers like to send when they want people to stop pretending. Preservation notices to the document service and the vendor. A demand to the planner for all contracts bearing my name and the authority by which they claim it. A cease instruction to any payment processor that believed I was authorizing funds. He asked if I had spoken with Lily since the spreadsheet arrived. I said not yet. He said good in the way a doctor says good when he means wait until we have the scan. He said when I do speak to her, I should ask questions with verbs and dates and keep my tone calm enough to make it useful. He said the first thing we would do is pull the pins from the grenades lined up on that account, and the second thing would be to keep my name from being stapled to any stage where I did not stand. I printed what he wanted and set the pages in stacks with sticky notes until the table looked like a map of a plan that had not yet decided if it was a road or a dam. While the printer worked, I called the plan administrator again to request physical statements mailed to me and paper-only status on all notices. Paul met me in his glass office and walked me through a duplicate set of locks. We set up a new alert tree, added a second contact number that goes to an old landline in the kitchen just in case, and created an internal note that any request using the phrase wedding or event required a call to me and a written reply from me that used a phrase only my family ever uses. The phrase came from Anne. It is a line about a pie with strawberries and luck choosing us. No planner will guess it. Paul slid a copy of the merchant profile across the desk. It listed a tax ID, a Delaware formation, and a Los Angeles address that matched a co-working space on Alameda. The descriptor field named the project Grayson Hamilton Experience. Paul said he had placed a fraud watch with the plan, and he would watch the account like it owed him money. He is a good man, and he understands my need for accuracy. On the ride home, the sky was a hard blue, and the front range looked closer than it was. I kept the radio off and let the sounds of Denver be my companion. A siren somewhere distant, a truck braking, a school bell that made me think of Anne in a courtyard somewhere, telling a boy he had more in him than he thought. At a light, I read the printout again. Someone had used my old signature image. Someone had taken the plan meant for textbooks and wanted to pour it into lights and catering and something called scent curation. Back at the house, I put the stacks on the table and wrote a date on each page with a fine-tip pen. I clicked photos with my phone and sent them to Alan with titles that would make sense in a month. He replied that he had already queued the letters and would send couriers and emails both. He said he would ask for the document service to preserve IP logs, device identifiers, and geolocation indicators. He said he would ask for consent from Lily to review anything with her name on it. He said if consent did not arrive, he would move forward with the parts that only touched me. I sat down and scrolled one more time through the planner messages. Every line insisted on beauty and ease. Every line hid the muscle underneath like it was rude to show it. I thought of Lily at 9 on a quilt in the yard watching Anne teach kids that honesty is a better light than a chandelier. I did not think Lily linked that account or forged anything. She is a person who pays late because she hates paperwork and then apologizes with flowers she cannot afford. She is not careless with the truth. But someone near her understood how to make a request look official, and how to make a father into a sponsor, and how to make an education plan into a checkbook. I heard myself say it, and the room heard it too. She does not know. Someone surely does. The words sat there and did not soften. I took the envelope from the drawer and added a new sheet to it, with the phrase, primary family partner, underlined twice. Then I called Alan back and told him I wanted every communication from here forward to be in writing. He said that was the right way to walk a narrow ledge. When the mail truck rattled past, I watched it disappear at the corner and listened to a quiet that had learned how to hold news without breaking. The clock in the hall knocked the next minute into place. I set my palms on the table and felt wood, paper, and a small charge of purpose find each other. Then I reached for a fresh legal pad, wrote the date, and printed the name Vanessa Moore at the top, followed by a short list of questions that would have answers whether she wanted them to or not. Alan calls before breakfast. He has copies of 3 executed agreements bearing my name, electronic signatures authenticated by a service he knows. The totals stack to $250,000. Vendor management, media production, venue premium access. He reads reference numbers and effective dates, and I write them as if numbers could pin a thing that wants to run. He says he has already issued preservation demands to the platform and to the planner. He tells me not to reply to any informal message that asks for clarifications. Paper only. Courier when possible. He will send a packet for my records before lunch. I pour oatmeal into a pot and stir without looking. By mid-morning, the first link arrives from a neighbor who rarely texts. A local site has posted a story with a headline using my name. Retired engineer sponsors daughter's $250,000 luxury wedding in Bora Bora. It lifts phrases from the planner's deck. Immersive guest experience. Bespoke content. A line says my generosity has inspired other families to consider similar investments in milestone moments. The comments are already blooming. Good for him. Must be nice. Wish my dad cared that much. A few ask how to contact the planning firm. I put the phone face down and step into the yard. Back inside, I stack Alan's email attachments on the table and mark them with dates and a simple system of pencil lines I used to use on job sites. 1 stroke for items that require action, 2 for items that require proof, 3 for items that require both. Before noon, I need stamps. So I walk to the post office on Monaco with a small bundle of letters for Alan's couriers to supplement. A man I recognize from the hardware store steps in behind me and gives the look people use when they think they have good news. He says he saw the piece. He asks if I pulled from my retirement to give Lily the wedding she deserves. I say nothing. He nods, as if my silence is the answer he hoped for, and starts talking about flights to Tahiti he once researched and never booked. I buy my stamps and walk home slow. The courier arrives after lunch. She hands me a hard envelope and asks for a signature. I sign and she leaves with a nod. Inside are printed versions of what Alan sent and letters on firm letterhead. The letters to the document service and the planning company are crisp. They cite statutes and demand logs and copies and chain of custody. At 3, I hear the carrier truck rattle the curb and the mailbox lid smack shut. The box is full, with envelopes heavy enough to announce themselves. For a moment, I think they are catalogs. Then I see my street written in calligraphy. Return addresses in Malibu and Santa Monica. I carry the stack to the table and sort. Most are addressed to names I do not know, care of Thomas Grayson. A few carry an almost familiar last name with a different first. The common line runs across the backs on the flaps in gold. Grayson Hamilton. I open one and find a card so ornate it feels like a dare. Save the date. A map to a clifftop venue, a web address for curated travel options, a note that formal invitations will follow, with attire guidance and media guidelines. I open another and find a different hand, still careful, still implying importance. Please return RSVPs by this date to the address on file. My address. I keep opening and find the same pattern. My house has been enrolled as a sorting room for a performance I am not allowed to attend. The refrigerator hums, then rests. The clock in the hall taps time with the small confidence of a thing that knows its job. I stack the cards and hold one of the envelopes to the light. The paper is thick all the way through. The ink has a sheen meant to impress. None of it carries my name where a guest's name goes. My name appears only where responsibility lives. Return here, send here, call here, if undeliverable. I picture Vanessa in an office with a window that faces west, instructing an assistant to set the father's address as the default for returns. Primary family partner, central point of contact. I see the plan as she sees it. Elegant, efficient. A clean line that runs money and mail through one place while keeping the stage free of inconveniences like history and men in scuffed dress shoes. I take one of the cards to the sink and run water across it. The ink bleeds like a secret. The paper buckles. I turn off the tap and hold the ruined thing until it stops dripping. Then I set it on the draining board and watch it dry in a shape that tells the truth. Beauty that cannot endure a small honesty does not deserve the ceremony it asks for. My phone rings. Another neighbor. She says congratulations in a voice pitched to carry across a fence. She says she did not know Bora Bora was even an option for ordinary people. I tell her that ordinary is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and thank her for the call. When we hang up, I put the phone in a drawer and shut it like a lid over bees. A boy pedals past on a bike that is a size too big and learns balance one wobble at a time. I remember Lily's first successful ride without my hand. She flew because she believed she could. That kind of belief does not need lighting or projection. It needs a road and the absence of a hand, and the courage to keep pedaling when you think you will fall. I return to the table and pull one of the invitations apart with my thumb to see how it was made. Layers. Vellum. A tiny square of card with their initials pressed into it. Someone spent hours making all this precisely beautiful. Somewhere a worker's hands hurt from folding. Somewhere a machine clicked and stuttered when the foil caught. I am not angry at craft. I am angry at the part that used my house as a mailbox for a party that believes I would stain its photographs. The article swells into a second cycle by evening when an aggregator drags it into a wider stream. My name appears in a headline above a photo of a boat that will never carry me. The comments alternate between praise and scorn and the occasional stranger suggesting better ways to spend $250,000. I sit with that and let it pass through. Strangers are a river. They move on when the next glittering rock turns the current. I take the stack of envelopes and sort them into two piles. One for returns, one for evidence. On the top of the evidence stack, I place the one that used my address as a command, return to. I write the date across the flap in small, neat numbers the way Anne did when she wanted the future to know when something began. Evening slides down the block. The kitchen gathers its shadows in the corners. I turn on the small lamp by the photo, and the glass reflects a soft square. Anne's cotton dress glows the way cotton does when it remembers a sun it stood in years ago. I look at the last envelope in my hand. The script that is not my daughter's. The flourish on a G that has nothing to do with Grayson and everything to do with performance. There is a point where patience is not a virtue. It is a way of letting other people write your story. I set the envelope down with care as if it were a tool that could still be useful, and felt something align in me that had been out of plumb all week. Enough. The phone buzzed on the counter, and a name I had not seen in years slid across the screen. Rachel Park. I answered and heard wind and footsteps. She said she was in Los Angeles between interviews and asked if I had a minute. I told her I did. She said she had been looking into LumaLive for a freelance piece, and that every path she followed led to my daughter's wedding. She said Eric was pushing it as a product launch, disguised as vows. Then she said the part that tightened the room. My name appeared in their materials as main sponsor. I asked how sure. She said, as sure as a person can be with screen captures, a downloaded deck. She said she would send everything to my email, and then I could decide what to do with it. She asked me not to reveal how it came to me. She said her source would lose a job, maybe a career. I said I understood, and would protect her where I could. She said, check your inbox. The files arrived. I clicked the first, and a full-screen slide showed a banner mock-up. On the left, LumaLive's sleek logo in white on a field of night blue. On the right, in gold, main sponsor, and then my name. Underneath ran a line that read, presenting in partnership with the Grayson family. The next slide mapped the guest journey to sponsor benefits. Step and repeat backdrop featuring sponsor name. Press interview area with sponsor identification. A media outreach calendar with my house listed as the primary contact. A schedule block that put the product demo 10 minutes after the first kiss. The final slide was a template press release with a quote attributed to me about investing in immersive celebrations for the next generation. I stood very still. The quote used words I have never used in my life. I scrolled back to the banner and tried to feel anything but the specific anger that comes when someone repurposes your name without asking. I used to build bridges people could cross safely. Now they were using my name as a bridge for deceit. I printed the deck and laid the pages on the table in a neat line, stacking the slides that mattered. The sponsor banner, the quote, the schedule diagram, the media list with a dozen outlets circled and a handful of influencer names under a heading that read Brand Friends. It read Confirm Final Sponsor Language with VM. I called Rachel back and asked where the deck had lived. She said in a shared cloud folder connected to a PR firm. She said the link came in a mass email to potential partners. She said she knew how the game worked and that this was not a normal wedding. She said she had tried to bring it up with Lily once, and Lily had gone quiet and then defensive. Rachel said she did not think Lily understood she was being cast as a story instead of a person. I thanked her and told her I would handle the rest. She said, if I needed a sworn declaration later, she would consider it. I promised to aim carefully. When we hung up, I wrote her name on my legal pad with a small note to call Alan before I pulled her further into this. I opened the folder again and looked for file details. The deck carried a last modified date from 2 nights ago. The author field listed an address at the PR firm with a surname that matched a press contact in the materials. I took screenshots that included metadata and saved the deck to my drive and a separate external stick. I emailed the file to a fresh address I keep for legal matters. Then, I called Alan. He asked me to forward everything and to add in any context I had from my earlier calls with Paul. He said we were moving from concern to evidence. He would draft a new round of letters. He would demand removal of my name and likeness from all marketing. He would instruct the firm and the vendor and LumaLive to preserve all drafts, comments, and email chains that touch the sponsor language. He would give them a short window to comply. He said not to warn anyone informally, paper only. He asked whether I wanted him to contact Lily, to ask for consent to review her communications. I told him not yet. When he hung up, I sat with the deck again. The vows appeared as a box labeled Ceremony Window. The demo featured a new sensor kit that could adapt lighting and sound to audience input. The honeymoon looked like a content partnership with a travel brand. I thought of Anne in the yard telling teenagers that love survives Tuesdays. I opened my email and saw a message filter slip. A reply from Vanessa Moore to a group thread with my address blind copied. It referenced sponsor talking points for a preliminary call and included a calendar placeholder for a media walkthrough. I forwarded it to Alan with a subject line that named what it was. I printed it and added it to the evidence stack. For a few minutes, I walked the length of the house. Front window, hall clock, back door, lavender, back door, hall clock, front window. My hand landed on the chair where Anne used to read and stayed there. If she were here, she would write one clear paragraph that made this whole situation smaller than it felt. She would hand it to me, and I would breathe. I went back to the table and wrote a list of questions for Vanessa. Who authorized the sponsor language? What document bore my signature, and how did she obtain the image? Why was my address used as a contact point without consent? What discussions had she had with Eric about using my name to open doors? What plans did she have to remove me from all materials by end of day? Under the questions, I wrote an answer to none of them. A letter from my lawyer will follow. I anonymized the deck and sent a scrubbed version to Rachel with a note that said, "Thank you, and your name is nowhere." She replied quickly that she had received it and hoped I would not need to use it publicly. She said she would be out of service for a while and would check in that night. I told her to stay safe and left it there. I made a sandwich I did not taste and drank a glass of water that did its job. A neighbor texted another link to the same story with a celebratory line about how proud I must be. I let the message sit without a reply. I checked my mailbox for anything that looked like life and found only one bill and a postcard for a charity thrift sale. On the walk back from the curb, I saw 2 kids chalk a hopscotch course on the sidewalk. I envied their clarity. Back inside, I gathered the deck, the emails, and my notes into a single PDF and attached it to a message to Alan with a subject line. I added a paragraph that said I wanted to move faster than they could. I asked for a draft I could sign by morning. I asked him to include language. He wrote back. He had a draft letter ready now if I wanted to review before dinner. He recommended couriers to the firm and the planner and a signature-required email to LumaLive. He suggested we copy a general counsel address if we could find it. He said the document service had acknowledged receipt of the first preservation letter. He did not say we would win. He said we were beginning properly. I took the draft into the backyard and read it under the shade. It used my name the way I intend to use it. It told the planner and the firm to stop. It told them to take my name down and keep it down. It told them to save everything and prepare to explain themselves. When I finished, I signed it and scanned it and hit send. Then I sent Alan the deck and the metadata and the thread with the blind copy of my own contact. I stood there with the smell of cut grass and warm cedar and felt the smallest lift in my chest. It was not relief. It was alignment. I said it out loud because saying it meant I had decided the next mile. All right, let us see whose bridge holds up better. I booked the first flight I could find. Denver was crisp at dawn, and Los Angeles met me with haze. A rideshare took me across the concrete river and into the arts district. Lily's studio sat on the fourth floor of a brick box. The receptionist asked who I was there to see. I said my daughter, and then I said her name. She made a call and asked me to wait. I did not sit. Lily came through the glass doors. She looked beautiful and tired in a way that said days start early and end late. Then the studio came back around her, and the careful settled on her face. She said we could talk in a small conference room with a long table and a wall of glass. We sat across from each other with the table between us and let the first minute be silent. I set the folder down. She set the tablet down. I asked if she truly understood where the wedding money was supposed to come from. She answered in a tone that would have belonged in a presentation. She said she knew and that she was proud. She said Eric believed a father should be happy to help his daughter have the wedding she had always imagined. She added that it would mean a lot to him if I shared in their dream, even if I did not share the stage. I asked if this wedding belonged to her or if it belonged to his campaign. The room held still. She looked at the table and traced a small circle on the wood with her finger. She said the wedding was theirs and that it could also be an opportunity. Eric arrived. He reached for my hand with easy warmth and called me Tom, as if we had already decided to be close. He said I should let their generation do this the way the world works now. He said social platforms had taught people how to love in public, and that there was nothing wrong with telling a good story loudly. I said that public deceit is still a wrong, and that volume does not fix it. I opened the folder and slid the first print toward him. It was the deck banner, with LumaLive on the left and main sponsor Thomas Grayson on the right. He said there must have been a miscommunication and that graphics teams move quickly. He said this was a working file and not for distribution. I slid the second page. Schedule with a product demo slotted 10 minutes after vows. Sponsor talking points. A quote attributed to me about investing in immersive celebrations. Lily leaned forward and read the lines, as if reading could change them. She said she had not seen these exact documents. She said the planner handled production and that the PR firm had a wide template that could have filled fields without asking. Her voice went a little softer. She said she was sorry if my name was used in a draft without consent. I asked about the 529 account and the electronic signature. I said my advisor had frozen everything and that the plan administrator had logged a link request with a copy of an old signature image. I said that image came from work years ago, and that someone had attached it to a role called primary family partner. Lily went pale in the space under her eyes. She said she did not know how any account got linked, and that she had never touched a 529. Eric started to speak, and I lifted a hand. I told him a set of letters had gone out. I told him counsel had demanded preservation of drafts and comments and logs. I told him my name and address were to be removed from every slide and list, and that any automated quote attributed to me would be withdrawn. I told him no one was to contact me except in writing. He said this was all solvable, and that a man like me should be proud to be associated with a milestone that would define a category. He said stories like this move industries forward. I said a marriage is not an industry, and that I had built things to carry weight, not to sell fog. He said press was already circling and expected a sponsor statement, and that it would be best for everyone if I took a gracious tone. He said he could have the PR team draft something that sounded like me. I told him the last line I would ever need drafted had already been written by the woman whose ring I still wear. Work is where you are useful. Love is where you do not quit at the same time. He smiled in a way that did not reach his face and said that was lovely, but not usable. Lily asked if we could pause and breathe. I let the silence stand a moment. Then I said I would always meet her halfway, so long as the ground we stood on was real. She said she never meant to push me out. She said the line in the email about my presence had gotten away from her. She said Eric had strong ideas about curation and flow. Her eyes moved to the window and stayed there. I asked why my address had been used as a mail hub. She said the planner set that to streamline returns. She said it had seemed harmless. She said it was efficient. Eric said the sponsor language would be fixed and that I should not overreact. He said the funds would flow regardless and that I could either be part of the narrative or not. I told him funds would not flow without my written permission and that the plan he thought he was running had changed direction. I said I would not pay for a launch event wrapped in vows. I said I would not lend my name to a product. He asked what I would pay for, then and there it was, a question that sounded like an invoice. I said I would pay for what keeps people fed and safe. I said I would pay for a ceremony witnessed by those who love them. I said I would pay for a room where vows did not compete with a battery of sensors. He called that quaint. I called it durable. Lily reached for her tablet and then put it down. She looked at her hands. She told me she wanted me there, but she wanted the day to be beautiful too. I told her beauty without truth cannot hold the weight of Tuesday. Eric stood and straightened his jacket and said he had a call. He told Lily to text him when she was done and told me it was good to see me again. He left the door open and the office noise spilled in and then faded as it closed on its hinge. The room felt larger without him and somehow colder. I gathered the prints back into the folder and slid it into my bag. I told Lily I had counsel and that the letters would do their work. I told her I was not against beauty. I was against fraud. I told her I would not let anyone turn the life we built into a backdrop. She whispered that she understood and then said she needed time to think. She did not look up. She watched the light move across the table as if it might carry an answer. The minutes stretched, quiet and exact, until the clock on the wall clicked once and gave it a name. A week folded itself into the calendar, and then the story broke wider than any conversation I had allowed myself to imagine. The first headline that found me carried the familiar rhythm of outrage, dressed as concern. A father backs out, a daughter's wedding in crisis. The piece lifted details from the deck and filled the gaps with confident guesses. It named the destination, listed a number that matched my envelope, and painted a picture of a generous man who had changed his mind at the last minute. By noon, it had been ingested by sites that copy the tone and forget the doubt. By evening, my name was threaded through comment sections where strangers practice verdicts. Some applauded a lesson about boundaries and budgets. Many more decided I was the miser who ruined a little girl's happy ending. The phone made polite noises on the counter as messages stacked. Congratulations from people who only read headlines. Disbelief from others who wanted me to deny the denial. Two voices I had not heard since Anne's funeral asked if they should still book flights. I answered few and then stopped answering. The house held quiet the way a good bridge holds load, not by ignoring it, but by distributing it where it can do the least harm. Sunday arrived with a thin blue sky and a kind of wind that makes cottonwood leaves talk. I went to church because habit is a kind of truth. The narthex smelled like coffee and nursery crayons. People who had known my name since Lily was in braids shook my hand and said they were praying. A few tilted their heads and asked if things might be sorted by the weekend. I told them I was grateful for patience. I did not speak for the weekend. After the second hymn, Pastor William Harris found me near the side aisle. He stands a little bent, as if the weight he carries has taught him to be careful with his back. He asked if we could walk the courtyard. We stood under the maple where the kids line up for popsicles in July. He said there was talk. He said some called me stubborn. He asked if that was fair. I told him stubborn is the kindest word for a man who still believes right and wrong are not opinions. He smiled with that slow, pastoral smile that holds both blessing and warning. He said storms pass and leave things revealed. He said, my job was to remain the same man before and after. I sat in the pew and listened hard to the reading. It was about a house built on rock and another on sand. Sometimes a metaphor avoids you for years and then finds you when it wants you to stand still. After the benediction, an usher with a voice like gravel told me he had a daughter who once confused a party with a promise. He placed a peppermint in my hand, because some men do not know how to say, I see you any other way. I thanked him and walked into sunlight that had turned hard. On the drive home, I turned the radio to a jazz station and let a saxophone fill the car with something that did not argue. The neighborhood looked the same and a little not. A man watering his lawn turned his head a fraction as if my truck had grown louder. A girl chalked a sun on the sidewalk and did not look up. I parked and stood in the kitchen and felt the clock in the hall give each minute its small wooden name. The email from Rachel arrived in the early afternoon with a subject line that did not betray its contents. She wrote that she had been pulling threads, and one of them led to a place where numbers go to hide. She attached a folder. Inside were invoices from a public relations firm and payment confirmations from a shell company with an address that matched Vanessa Moore's office suite. The invoices shared a format and a habit of arriving on Fridays at 4. The amounts were round enough to raise an engineer's suspicion. 10,000 here for influencer seating, 15 for content capture, 25 for narrative travel logistics. The memo lines read like someone had learned how to turn air into a deliverable. Rachel wrote that the shell company did not appear anywhere in the planner's public materials. It did appear as a vendor of record for Luma Live on 2 events in the last year. It also appeared as a recipient on a transfer list associated with my daughter's project, a list that carried the words "Sponsor Approved Package." She added a spreadsheet where columns lined up like soldiers again. Payee, date, time, approval initials, and then my initials, where someone had pasted a signature image and let the system fill the rest. She warned me that laundering can look like logistics when no one asks for receipts. I stared at the screen until the words stopped moving. Then I printed everything and laid pages in rows on the table like a dry riverbed that had decided to show its stones. In one sequence, a bill from the PR firm matched a same-day pass-through to the shell company within cents, and then bounced again into a production account with a new label. In another sequence, a single approval unlocked 3 transfers within minutes to 3 arms of the same 2 people. Round amounts, Friday afternoons, copied notes. It read like choreography. I called Alan and he made a sound that means a lawyer is pleased and angry in equal measures. He told me to scan and send with file names that will survive discovery. He said he would expand the preservation demands and add the firms in the shell. He said he would request bank records through counsel and ask for an emergency hearing if anyone tried to move money after the letters were served. He asked if I was all right. I told him I was upright. He said upright is what we ask from a man when the weather changes. While I waited for his courier, I walked the lavender and tried to think in a straight line. If Rachel was right, and the document suggested she was, then Eric and Vanessa had built a small river that ran sponsor funds through a narrows where fees gather like driftwood. The more eyes on the event, the more licensing available, the more plausible reasons to move numbers around until they looked like different numbers. If you attach a father's name to a thing, you can save yourself the trouble of asking where a line begins and ends. The courier arrived at the door like a person who knows where the door is. He took the envelope and left a receipt that looked like seriousness again. I filled a glass and drank water and watched a neighbor pull a trash bin back to a fence. My phone pulsed. A comment thread had found my niece's wedding pictures and decided that daughters who smile with their fathers are lucky that their fathers do not read headlines. I put the phone face down again. There is only so much river a person needs to hear. Around 5, the landline rang. Very few people know that number. Pastor Harris again. He said he had read the second wave of stories and felt a nudge to check on me. I told him I was working and that work is kind. He asked if Lily had called. I said not since the meeting. He said he would keep her in his prayers regardless of geography. He said the church would hold a place for both of us, even if the pew between us felt wide. I sat at the table in the hour the light turns honest and read Rachel's email again for anything I had missed. At the end, she had added a line about a source inside the PR firm who had spoken off the record. The source said Eric had pitched the wedding as the perfect storm, the exact phrase the source used. A built-in sponsor, a bride with a camera-ready career, a planner who understood speed. The source said Eric laughed when someone asked about consent. The source said he waved his hand and said families always come around once they see the photos. I folded the pages into the file with Alan's letter and slid it all into the drawer under the photo. The glass caught the last of the day and laid a thin bar of light across Anne's shoulder. I rested my fingers on the frame. The wood was warm from the lamp. In the quiet, I told her the part of the truth I could say out loud. Anne, if you were here, you would understand. The next thing my hands did was reach for the linen closet. I moved the quilt and lifted the cedar box and carried it to the kitchen table. The air inside the box held that faint breath of cedar. Under a ribbon of old programs lay an envelope the color of cream with my name written in Anne's careful hand. I sat down and let my fingers rest on it. I ran a thumb along the flap, and it yielded without a fuss. Inside was one sheet folded twice. Her handwriting met me like a voice. There was no date, only the words that mattered. If the day comes when our daughter cannot recognize what real love is, let it carry its own consequences. If someone teaches her to believe her worth is counted in money, ask her to walk away. Love does not keep receipts. It asks for kindness paid in advance. Then the line that made the breath in me stand still. My sweet Lily, Love does not need to perform. I read it again and closed my eyes and let every place those sentences could reach find their footing. When I opened my eyes, the words were still there, simple and exact. I laid the letter flat and smoothed the corners. My hands knew what to do next. I took the old flatbed scanner from the pantry shelf and set it on the counter. I wiped it with the edge of my shirt and placed the page. The file appeared on the laptop with a name that did not deserve it, so I renamed it with Anne's name and the word letter. I opened an email to Lily and attached the scan. I put 2 words in the subject line, from Mom. I wrote nothing in the body. Anything I added would be less than what was already there. When I hit send, I stood very still. My phone did not ring. No dots appeared to promise an answer. I poured water into a glass and drank until the rim was dry. I walked to the backyard and sat on the step. The lavender moved in the light. I said her line out loud, in case the world needed to hear it again. Love does not need to perform. Back inside, I set the envelope back in the cedar box, but kept the letter on the table. I looked at the phone twice and then told myself to let it be. The 3rd time, it buzzed. A video call alert from Lily. I answered, and her office came into view with the city flattened behind glass. When her face appeared, her eyes were already wet. She did not speak for a moment. She said she had just opened an email that felt like a door. She said she was in the small conference room with the blinds half closed because the world felt too bright. She said she could hear Mom in every line. She wiped her cheek and apologized for crying and then cried anyway. I did not fill the space. I let the letter do its work between us. She said, the sentence about consequences hurt and helped at the same time. She said the part about money felt like a hand on her shoulder, turning her toward the right road. She read the last line slowly to herself. She asked me when Anne wrote it. I told her there was no date. I said it had been waiting in the box and that I had not earned finding it so much as obeyed being sent to it. Lily nodded and said that sounded like Mom. Then she looked past the phone at something on the table. She took a breath and told me she did not know how she had let herself become a stage. She said she could hear Eric's language in her own emails. She said the word efficient and then shook her head. She said she had told herself she could have both, the beauty and the truth, the product and the promise. She laughed once without any joy in it and said she had forgotten that truth does not share well when it is asked to carry a show. I told her I did not need speeches. I told her I needed her to remember what she already knew when she was 9 on a quilt in the backyard. She smiled a little and then bit her lip. She asked if I was still angry. I said anger was not the word. I said I was busy, and busy was a good place to set feelings while you keep harm from growing. She nodded again. She said she had a meeting in an hour and did not know what she would say. I said she could tell the truth in whatever size she could carry. She looked down and then back up and said she would try. Her phone vibrated on her end, and she glanced at it, and then back to me. She asked if she could call me later. I told her I would be here. We let the call end without the usual soft jokes. I picked up the letter and read it again from the beginning. The words did not move, but they did change. The way a door is the same door in morning and at night, and not at all the same to the person walking through it. I folded the page along the old lines and slipped it back into the envelope and set the envelope on the box. I made tea, because a kettle knows how to give you a small task with a result. While it warmed, I remembered Anne in the yard with her seniors, one May, telling them the difference between performance and practice. She said practice is the daily work of learning yourself into a shape that can love. Performance is what you show strangers. Practice is what you give the person who stays. The kids had nodded because she made everything sound like something they might already know if they chose to remember. Lily had been on the steps with me that day. She whispered that Mom always makes hard things look simple. I told her simple does not mean easy. She said she would remember that. Maybe now she had. The kettle rattled and I poured water over a bag until the cup released steam. I carried it to the table and set it beside the box. The phone buzzed again. Not a call, just a text bubble that opened as a photo. It was a shot of the letter on the table in Lily's conference room. Beside it lay a blue pencil and a paper napkin from the office kitchen. On the napkin, Lily had written 3 short lines in her own quick hand. Consequences are teachers. Worth is not cash. Love does not perform. Then another bubble. She wrote that she was going to keep the photo in her phone where the loud things live, so a quiet thing could sit in the same place and do its work. I looked at the picture until the tea went cool. The city outside my window had shifted into that late afternoon brightness that always reminds me of school pickups and Anne waving from the curb with a stack of graded papers under her arm. I lifted the mug and took a mouthful anyway. It tasted like leaves that had done their best. When evening came, I put the box back in the closet behind the quilt. I turned off the kitchen light and the hall light and let the lamp by the photo be the last to go. In the dim, I could just make out the curve of Anne's cheek and the stubborn crease in my jacket on a courthouse day. The quiet felt less like a weight and more like a place to set tools before picking them up again. The phone lay flat on the table, dark and patient. Somewhere in Los Angeles, my daughter was holding a page that did not need an algorithm to be true. The morning came with a low, gray sky that made the kitchen light feel heavier than usual. I poured coffee and let the first sip settle, watching the steam drift against the window pane. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the radio, the kind of quiet that holds its breath when it knows something is about to break. The newsreader's voice came on, steady and unhurried. Rachel's story had gone live at dawn. The headline was everywhere before I even opened my laptop. Luma Live Wedding. $250,000 marketing fraud exposed. Her words were measured, the kind that leave no room for denial. She had laid out every thread Eric and Vanessa pulled, from the shell companies to the false sponsor signatures, from the wedding invoices to the transfers labeled event logistics. The article named dates, amounts, and the account that carried my name. It ended with one clean sentence that landed like a gavel. The bridge between illusion and theft was built on trust and crossed with greed. I didn't move for a long time. The coffee went cold in my hand. The sound of a delivery truck passed outside, followed by a burst of birds startled into flight. When the phone buzzed again, it was Alan. He said I might want to turn on the television. Eric had called a press conference. He said Rachel had poked the hornet's nest and now we'd see what came out of it. I turned the knob on the old radio until the static cleared. The broadcast came through from Los Angeles, live. The reporter's voice described the scene. Cameras flashing, microphones clustered around the podium, Eric stepping up in his tailored suit, face pale but composed. He thanked the media for attending and began the script he had written for himself long ago. He said, innovation always faces misunderstanding, that the company had been transparent, that the allegations were exaggerated by people seeking attention. He used words like integrity and vision until they sounded like furniture being dragged across a floor. Then came the question that cracked the air. A woman's voice, sharp and calm. She asked how a company that claimed to value honesty explained a $100,000 business loan filed under his fiancé's name and a non-existent address in Pasadena. She asked if he could confirm whether those funds were routed through the same shell company mentioned in the article. For a second, there was no sound at all. You could hear the soft, mechanical click of a camera focusing. Eric tried to speak. What came out was not words, but a half-formed sound, the kind a man makes when he realizes the room has turned against him. He stammered about accounting errors, about misinformation, about people out to harm his reputation. The crowd didn't buy it. You could feel it in the space between his sentences. Then another reporter spoke up, asking about forged digital signatures, and another asked if his investors knew the sponsor listed on the deck had disavowed him. Every syllable tightened the air. Someone in the crowd laughed once, sharp and short, and the microphones picked it up. The feed caught the shuffle of papers, a chair scraping the floor, the tremor of breath caught in his throat. Then silence, long and perfect, the kind that no one can talk their way out of. I sat at my kitchen table and let that silence fill the house. People like him are afraid of silence because it's the one sound they can't control. It's the sound of truth standing still. The radio announcer's voice returned, apologizing for the break, explaining that the press conference had ended abruptly. They replayed a clip of Rachel's interview outside the venue. She spoke simply, without triumph. She said that accountability matters more than spectacle. She said the facts were clear, and she trusted the law to do what people could not. Alan called again an hour later. He said the Attorney General's office had opened a preliminary investigation into LumaLive's financial practices. He said the company's board had issued a statement suspending Eric pending review. He said police had already requested copies of the contracts and payment records. He sounded like a man who had seen a storm finally find its target. I thanked him, and he told me to keep everything locked up until further notice. By afternoon, the markets had taken the story and chewed on it. Luma Live's stock dropped 12% in 2 hours. Investors distanced themselves in paragraphs that sounded rehearsed. The wedding venue posted a cancellation notice online, citing unforeseen circumstances. Social media, loud and fickle as ever, had moved from worship to outrage. They called it poetic justice. They called it karma. I didn't call it anything. Justice isn't poetry. It's balance, returning. I spent the rest of the day in small motions. Dishes washed, lavender watered, mail sorted. When the phone rang again, it was Rachel. Her voice carried the weight of a night without sleep. She said she hadn't expected the story to explode that fast. She said she worried about Lily and asked if I had heard from her. I hadn't. I told her that sometimes quiet means thinking, and thinking takes time. She said she hoped so. Then she thanked me for trusting her and said she was heading offline for a while. I told her she'd done good work and hung up before the thanks had a chance to get sentimental. Evening fell over the kitchen, slow and certain. The radio murmured a newscast replaying the clip of Eric's final moment before the mic cut. I turned the volume down until his voice faded into static. Outside, the light turned soft gold over the roofs, the color of things that have survived being seen. The house smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. I set Anne's photo on the table and leaned back, looking at her face in the fading light. She had that small half-smile, the one that used to tell me she already knew how the story would end. I told her, half aloud, that it had all come apart the way she would have expected. I told her I'd heard the man break on live radio. I told her the sound wasn't anger or fear, it was emptiness, finally meeting its echo. The radio gave a short bulletin before the hour. The police had confirmed an official inquiry into the Lumalive case. Eric Hamilton had been taken in for questioning. Vanessa Moore was under investigation for financial misconduct. The broadcaster's tone was clinical, detached, like it was just another story sliding down the wire. I switched it off and let the silence reclaim the room. I sat there until the shadows deepened and the first streetlight flickered on outside. Somewhere, far away, men in suits were writing statements they didn't believe, and my daughter was reading a letter that asked nothing of her except truth. I listened to the clock in the hallway, steady and patient, giving each second its rightful name. I closed my eyes and thought how quiet sounds when it finally belongs to you again. I opened them to the sound of knuckles on wood and the sight of a woman on my porch holding a leather folder and a warm kind of authority. She introduced herself as Detective Sofia Morales from the Financial Crimes Unit and held up a card I did not need to read. I asked her in. She said if I had not blocked those transfers when I did, the full $250,000 would have been gone. She said I had not only kept money in place, I had kept the story in one piece long enough for the truth to enter it. I poured coffee without asking, and she accepted it with a small, tired smile. She opened her folder and walked me through what she could say aloud. Warrants served before sunrise on the document service and the two firms. Bank logs moving our way. Eric Hamilton picked up for questioning when he arrived at a lawyer's office in Century City. Vanessa Moore notified that her professional license was under emergency review. She asked about the account freeze on the college plan. I showed her the printouts and the audit trail Paul pulled and the chain of letters Alan sent. She asked permission to copy what pertained to my name, and I nodded and watched her phone scan each page while her eyes marked the places where fraud had tried to be tidy. She asked if I had saved the email with my old signature image and the deck with my name under main sponsor. I slid them across, and she logged the time and placed them back exactly where they had been. She said I should expect follow-up questions about IP addresses and devices. She said her team would handle interview requests, but I was under no obligation to give color to anyone with a microphone. She said Rachel's article had given them a straight road to run and that the timing of the press conference had helped more than Eric knew. She asked how long my wife had been gone, and I told her. When she stood to leave, she placed a hand flat on the folder, the way you do when you promise yourself to a job. She said again that if I had not frozen the account, the week would have read very differently. She said good work in that quiet way that carries more weight than an award. I rinsed the cups and went to the yard. The bees went about their honest shifts. I drove to the store and bought bread, and the kind of cheese she liked when she was little. I put fresh sheets on the bed in her old room and opened the window to let in the mountain air. Her ride dropped her at the curb while the shadows were just beginning to lengthen. She stepped out in jeans and a sweater that looked like it had not slept in a drawer. We walked to the backyard and stood at the low fence that keeps the garden in one place. She said she had believed him because he said the things she wanted to hear. She kept her eyes on the lavender when she said it. I told her that I had chosen silence because sometimes the truth does not need to be said. She nodded and knelt to pinch a stem the way her mother taught her. She said she had read Rachel's story in a conference room with the blinds half closed. She said the line about the loan made her stomach go cold. She said the calls from Eric had come like rain and then stopped when he learned the police wanted to talk. She said she had told Vanessa not to call again. She said she had told her team to remove her name from everything and to send a correction to anyone who had printed the old version. She said she had asked a junior designer to take the lead on a project she loved because till it was clean, she could not trust her own eye. We sat on the low step near the back door where so many childhood conversations had found their endings. I made sandwiches and brought them out on a plate that has survived moves and seasons. She ate like a person relearning hunger. Between bites, she asked if I hated her. I told her I did not hate her. I told her I had been furious, and then I had been busy, and then I had been still. I told her I was her father, and that love is not a performance here. She leaned her shoulder to mine, and we breathed the same steady breath for a while. She asked if the church would still feel like home. I said pews do not take sides, and Pastor Harris knows how to hold a space for a story to end better than it started. She said she wanted to talk to him and ask if the sanctuary would forgive her for confusing a stage with a promise. I told her, sanctuaries are built for that. She asked what would happen to Eric. I said that was no longer mine to decide. I said the law would do what the law does when it has enough paper. She asked if I felt vindicated. I told her I felt balanced. I told her bridges feel that way when the load finally distributes the way the design intended. She smiled without showing teeth, and I thought of the first day she learned how to ride, and how she laughed when she realized I had let go. She looked at the lavender and said a string of small sentences at once. She would call the venue and release the date. She would write a simple note to the people who had been invited and explain without spectacle. She would send money back, where money had sneakily been asked to go. She would take the letter from her mother and keep it in her nightstand. She would go back to work next week and bring coffee to the junior designer and listen without telling anyone how to solve anything for a while. She would sit with the part of herself that wanted applause and teach it to be quiet. I told her that sounded like a plan made out of real wood. She laughed a little, the good kind, and asked if we could plant another lavender next spring. I said we could, and that we would. The evening found us the way it always does in Colorado, with a blue that deepens and a coolness that reminds you the mountains are close. She rested her head on my shoulder and did not move it. At some point, the porch light clicked on and washed the steps with a soft circle. We stayed where we were and let the day finish its work. No anger left, no speeches needed, only the peace that comes after a storm, when you can finally hear your own house again. The garden held its shape. The clock inside the hall kept time like it always has, giving each minute a name and then letting it go. 3 months is a long time when you measure it in lavender. The plants Anne started have pushed into another season, silver green rising to purple, bees working the rows with the focus of a good crew on a clean job. News traveled its own road. Eric took a plea. 3 years probation, restitution set on paper that will follow him like a shadow. A condition that keeps him near a courthouse when he would rather be near a camera. Loom Alive filed and folded. Vendors lined up to take what they could from what was left. In Denver, life did the opposite of headlines. Lily found a 50-year-old storefront on Colfax, with light that pours in from the south. She painted the walls a soft white and hung a simple sign that reads, Grayson Studio. The first week, she set 2 chairs by the door and a small table with a pitcher of water and cups for anyone who walked in with questions. The second week, she brought in a drafting table from our garage. The third week, she called the landlord and asked permission to plant in the narrow strip of earth by the sidewalk. We spent a Saturday morning making that little city soil ready. We laid compost in a straight line of twine and set small lavender starts in a row across from where the public walks. A woman with a paper grocery bag said the scent would make her life better, and I believed her. We watered, patted, and stood back. She said paperwork had settled where it needed to settle, and thanked me again for keeping my records like a person who knows how to build something that stands. Pastor Harris blessed the doorway one evening. Neighbors brought muffins and advice. One old carpenter I know stopped by to tell Lily the best place to buy screws that do not strip. He treated her like a professional. On a Wednesday, the lavender in our yard showed first bloom. 2 days later, the new row by Lily's studio followed as if reminded. She texted a photo at sunrise. I drove over with coffee, and we stood on the sidewalk in front of her sign and watched the city move around us. Buses sighed. A jogger lifted a hand without slowing. That afternoon, we sat on the back steps again. She asked if I regretted not going to her wedding. The question landed soft because it did not carry a demand. I told her the only thing I know to be exact. That was not a wedding. It was an advertisement in a tuxedo, and I've never attended a dishonest ad. She nodded and let that live without arguing it smaller. She said sometimes she hears Eric's voice in the back of her head and turns the music up, and then turns it down again. Because music is not the same as silence. She said silence is where she can hear Mom. She said Anne's line about love not needing to perform visits her when she is drawing and scratches out a flourish that wants attention more than it wants to hold a room. She said she has learned to enjoy the sound of a pencil. That is what growth sounds like in a studio. Wood and graphite and a human hand slowing itself down. We took on a small project together because someone in the neighborhood had a kitchen that needed to be a kitchen again instead of a place where appliances pose. Lily handled the lines and light. I helped where weight met weight. We argued in the old way that ends with both people being right in the places that matter. When the client stood in her finished room, she cried without embarrassment and said she could finally make soup without moving furniture. In the evenings, Lily comes by the house, and we take a walk around the block. We pass the church and the school and the house with the tire swing where a father is always better than the wood he hangs it from. Sometimes we stop at the community garden and point at tomatoes and guess which will blush first. The letter from Anne sits in the cedar box where I can reach it without ritual. I do not need to read it every day. I know what it says the way you know the path from your bed to the kitchen at night without bruising your shin. Still, once in a while, I take it out and let the paper remind my fingers that words can hold shape even when time would rather fold them. One evening, as the heat fell out of the day, Lily asked if I thought she would ever marry. I told her that was for her and time to decide. I told her I would show up wherever love chose to stand, so long as the floor could bear it. She laughed and said she has learned to test floors. News of Eric's probation came in a sentence on the evening roundup. It said he would be monitored and could not run a company without supervision for the length of his term. It said the company he founded no longer existed. It did not say what he learned. That part is never in the news. On a Friday, we held a small opening for Lily's studio. No speeches, no playlist that tried too hard. We set out lemonade and cut strawberries the way a diner waitress once did for Anne and me on a day that started it all. Friends came and stood and talked about kitchens and light and where to put a chair so a person wants to sit. Pastor Harris said a blessing that sounded like permission to begin. Detective Morales stopped by on her way home and took a deep breath by the lavender and said, "This is what restitution smells like." Rachel sent flowers with a card that said, "Only well done," and it was more than enough. As the last guests drifted away, Lily locked the door and we walked to the curb. Traffic thinned. The sky turned that late summer violet that makes you believe in second chances. She took my arm. We stood there without filling the air, because it did not need us to. The bees had gone where bees go, and the plants held their place. The sign over the door caught the last light and gave it back. I have thought a lot about revenge since the day the email arrived with a number and a warning not to be awkward. It turns out revenge can be quiet. It can look like lavender and a clean ledger and a small shop where work is done the slow way. People can buy a ceremony with money, but respect refuses a price. Some truths improve with silence. Sometimes silence is the most elegant answer you can give a person who mistakes performance for love. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that their worth is not printed on an invoice. Like it if it steadied you. Subscribe if you want more stories that keep faith with Tuesdays and the work that holds. Do not let anyone teach you that your value lives in a bill they send. Keep your promises, grow what you can, and when the season returns, let the lavender tell you what survived.